In this episode, we begin with a topic that sounds formal at first, but becomes very practical once you see what it does inside a real organization. An information security governance framework is not just a stack of policies or a set of diagrams for executives. It is the way an organization decides who has authority, how security decisions are made, how risk is understood, how responsibilities are assigned, and how leaders make sure security supports the business instead of drifting into confusion or inconsistency. For someone studying the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, this matters because good security work does not survive on technical effort alone. It depends on structure, accountability, direction, and enough leadership discipline that important decisions do not change wildly from one department, project, or crisis to the next. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful place to start is with the idea of governance itself, because beginners often mix governance and management together as if they mean the same thing. Governance is about direction, oversight, accountability, and decision rights, while management is about carrying out the work inside that structure. In simple terms, governance answers who decides, what matters, how priorities are set, and how leaders know whether security is being handled properly. Management then turns that direction into action through daily operations, projects, monitoring, training, and response. If an organization has strong management but weak governance, teams may work hard and still move in different directions because no one has defined priorities clearly. If it has strong governance but weak management, leaders may set sensible expectations that never become real behavior because execution is inconsistent or underdeveloped. An information security governance framework is the organized structure that makes governance real instead of leaving it as a vague idea. It brings together principles, roles, policies, decision paths, reporting relationships, oversight practices, and accountability mechanisms that help the organization guide security in a consistent way. The framework does not have to be huge to be useful, and it does not need to look exactly the same in every organization. What matters is that it gives leaders a repeatable way to connect business goals, risk decisions, and security responsibilities. Without that framework, security often depends too heavily on personal influence, informal habits, or the preferences of whoever speaks most confidently in the room. A strong framework replaces that instability with a structure people can follow even when priorities shift, leadership changes, or incidents create pressure and uncertainty. One reason governance frameworks matter so much is that information security affects nearly every part of a modern organization, even when people outside security do not always notice it. Security decisions influence technology design, vendor selection, privacy practices, product development, incident response, budget priorities, employee behavior, and the trust customers place in the organization. Because those decisions cut across so many areas, they cannot be left entirely to informal conversations or last-minute approval chains. A governance framework helps the organization decide how security will be represented in major decisions and how disagreements will be handled when business speed, cost, and protection needs pull in different directions. This is especially important for new learners to understand because governance is not an abstract executive exercise. It is how the organization creates order around security so that the work supports business reality instead of reacting to it in fragments. A well-implemented governance framework begins with alignment to organizational goals, because security is not supposed to operate as a separate mission with its own isolated priorities. If the organization is focused on growth, trust, resilience, regulatory confidence, or service reliability, the governance framework should help security support those outcomes in a disciplined way. That means security leaders need to understand what the business is trying to achieve and how much risk leadership is willing to accept while pursuing those goals. Governance becomes effective when it turns those business realities into guidance for decision-making, resource use, and oversight. For example, a business that depends heavily on customer trust may require stronger visibility into data protection decisions, while a business built around operational continuity may need governance that pays closer attention to resilience, recovery confidence, and dependency risk. The framework should make those priorities visible so security effort reflects real organizational needs rather than generic ambition. Roles and responsibilities are one of the core parts of implementation, because a governance framework cannot work well if people are unclear about ownership and authority. Someone must be accountable for leading the security program, others must be responsible for operating controls, and still others must provide oversight, risk review, or executive sponsorship. This does not mean security owns every risk and every control directly. In most organizations, business leaders, system owners, project leaders, human resources, legal staff, privacy teams, and technology leaders all carry parts of the security picture. A good governance framework makes those relationships clear enough that accountability does not disappear in a shared language that sounds collaborative but leaves no one truly responsible. Beginners should notice that confusion about ownership is one of the fastest ways security programs lose traction. If no one knows who decides, who approves, who escalates, and who accepts risk, the organization will struggle even when talented people are trying hard to do the right thing. Leadership involvement is another central element because governance is weak when security is treated as a lower-level technical concern with limited executive visibility. Senior leaders do not need to perform security tasks themselves, but they do need to understand how security risk affects the business and how the framework expects them to sponsor, review, and guide important decisions. In many organizations, the board of directors or equivalent governing body provides broad oversight. Senior executives connect strategy to operations, and security leadership translates technical and risk information into business terms leadership can act on. That chain matters because governance is how security becomes part of organizational leadership rather than a specialist conversation happening on the side. For a CISM learner, this is a crucial lesson. Strong security governance does not mean executives approve every technical detail. It means they set direction, define accountability, review meaningful risk, and make sure the organization is not leaving important security decisions to chance. Policies, standards, and related guidance are often the most visible pieces of a governance framework, but they are only useful when they are connected to authority and real operating expectations. A policy expresses what the organization expects and what principle or requirement leaders want enforced. Standards and procedures then provide more detail about how those expectations are supported in practice. If implementation stops at publishing documents, the framework will look stronger than it actually is. Real implementation requires making sure the policies fit the organization's environment, are understood by the people affected, are backed by leadership, and include some way of handling exceptions when business needs and security expectations come into tension. That exception handling is important because mature governance recognizes that not every situation fits perfectly inside a rule. The framework should provide a disciplined way to review, approve, monitor, and eventually resolve exceptions rather than allowing quiet workarounds to become the organization's unofficial operating model. Risk management must also be woven into the governance framework because governance without risk visibility becomes little more than administrative control. The organization needs a way to identify important risks, evaluate them consistently, decide who can accept them, and make sure those decisions are visible enough for proper oversight. A good governance framework does not assume every risk can or should be eliminated. Instead, it creates a disciplined process for deciding which risks need stronger treatment, which can be tolerated for business reasons, and which should trigger escalation because they exceed the organization's stated appetite. This is especially useful for beginners to understand because many security disagreements are really governance questions about risk, not technical questions about whether a control exists. When risk processes are built into the framework, the organization is better able to make trade-offs openly instead of pretending every decision is obvious or purely objective when it often involves real business judgment. Reporting and oversight are also essential because leaders cannot govern what they cannot see clearly. An implemented governance framework should define what security information gets reported upward, how often it is reviewed, and which kinds of issues require special attention. Those reports should focus on matters that support decision-making, such as major risks, control weaknesses, incident trends, compliance concerns, progress on strategic priorities, and areas where leadership action or funding may be needed. If reporting is too technical, executives may struggle to understand it. If it is too shallow, they may miss meaningful exposure until a crisis forces the issue. Strong governance reporting translates security conditions into business-relevant insight without oversimplifying the reality. For someone new to this topic, that translation function is one of the most valuable parts of the entire framework. It helps leadership stay engaged, keeps security tied to enterprise priorities, and creates a way to measure whether the governance structure is influencing outcomes or merely generating paperwork. Implementation also depends on embedding governance into normal business processes rather than treating it as a separate layer added after important choices are already made. Security governance should have a place in project approval, change management, third-party review, architecture decisions, incident escalation, exception handling, and strategic planning. If security enters those conversations too late, leaders are often forced into rushed decisions where cost, deadlines, and design choices have already narrowed the available options. A governance framework becomes stronger when it helps security participate at the right points instead of only reacting to finished decisions. This matters because many organizational failures are not caused by the absence of policy. They are caused by policy being disconnected from the moments where real commitments get made. Beginners should take this seriously because implementation is not about announcing a framework and hoping people remember it. It is about placing the framework where business choices actually happen so that security guidance has a chance to shape outcomes early enough to matter. Culture has a major effect on whether a governance framework succeeds because people do not follow structures merely because they exist on paper. If the organization rewards speed at all costs, ignores policy when deadlines tighten, or treats security review as a nuisance rather than part of responsible operation, the framework will weaken quickly. By contrast, if leaders consistently reinforce accountability, explain the purpose behind security expectations, and model the behavior they want others to follow, the framework becomes far more durable. Good implementation, therefore, includes communication, training, and change management that help people understand not just what the framework requires, but why it exists and how it helps the organization. For beginners, this is a useful reminder that governance is partly structural and partly behavioral. The framework provides the skeleton, but culture determines whether the organization actually moves with that structure or spends its time quietly working around it whenever pressure appears. A common mistake is trying to implement a governance framework that is far more complex than the organization can realistically support. Complexity can create the appearance of maturity, but it can also slow decisions, confuse responsibilities, and overwhelm teams that are still building basic capability. A smaller organization may need a simpler framework with clearer reporting lines and fewer formal committees, while a larger or more regulated organization may require deeper layering and more structured oversight. The key is fit, not size. The framework should be strong enough to create accountability and consistency without becoming so heavy that people treat it as an obstacle instead of a guide. Another common mistake is assuming that adopting a well-known framework name automatically solves governance problems. External models can be useful references, but implementation still requires tailoring, leadership support, and disciplined follow-through inside the specific organization that is trying to use them. Measurement and improvement complete the picture because governance frameworks should evolve as the organization changes. Business priorities shift, technology environments develop, regulations change, and lessons emerge from audits, incidents, and strategic reviews. An implemented framework should include some way to assess whether responsibilities remain clear, whether reporting supports real decisions, whether exception handling is under control, and whether governance is helping security stay aligned with business goals. If recurring problems keep appearing, the framework may need refinement, not just stronger enforcement. This continuous improvement mindset is important because governance is not a one-time construction project that finishes when the documents are approved. It is an operating model that needs to remain useful under changing conditions. As you step back from the topic, the main lesson becomes clear. Implementing information security governance frameworks means turning security from isolated effort into organized leadership practice. When the framework is aligned, clear, risk-aware, visible, and integrated into real business activity, it helps the organization make better decisions, assign responsibility more honestly, and support security in a way that can endure pressure instead of collapsing under it.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.